Karith 9 was the kind of world that made you question every life choice that led you to stepping foot on its surface, which in my case was a series of increasingly questionable decisions starting with, I should specialize in crystalline technology, and culminating in sure, I'll take a contract on an ice world ruled by aliens whose touch can literally freeze your skin off. The temperature outside the palace dome hovered at a balmy -43 degrees Celsius. The wind carried ice crystals that could strip flesh from bone, and the local population had evolved biological adaptations that made them both stunningly beautiful and absolutely terrifying in equal measure. I'd been here 3 months, maintaining the crystal-based systems that powered everything in the Frost Palace, and I'd learned exactly one important rule that superseded all others. Never, under any circumstances, touch a glaciary, especially not royalty. Vera, I said to my AI assistant as I trudged through the palace corridors toward the royal armory, my breath fogging despite the environmental controls in my suit. Remind me why I thought this contract was a good idea. You were approximately 97,000 credits in debt and facing eviction from your apartment on Station Kepler. Vera replied with the kind of cheerful helpfulness that AI designers apparently thought was encouraging rather than deeply irritating. The glaciary contract offered triple standard rates plus hazard pay. You calculated you could clear your debts in 18 months. Right. Money. That thing that won't matter when I'm a frozen corpse because I accidentally brushed against someone whose skin is literally cold enough to cause frostbite. Your concern is statistically valid. There have been 47 documented cases of humans suffering cold contact injuries from glaciary touch in the past decade. That's not reassuring, Vera. I was not attempting to be reassuring. I was providing relevant statistical context. The glaciary were beautiful in the way that natural disasters are beautiful, objectively stunning, but also potentially lethal if you got too close. They were humanoid, roughly the same size and shape as humans, but their skin had a crystalline quality that caught light and refracted it in subtle patterns. Their hair ranged from white to pale blue, and their eyes were silver or gold without visible pupils. The most dramatic feature was their biological adaptation to Karith 9 brutal cold. Their skin maintained a surface temperature well below freezing, which made direct contact with unprotected human skin extremely dangerous. The royal family, the glaciary ruling bloodline, had the most pronounced version of these traits. They were taller, more refined in their features, and their cold was more intense. They also had a cultural thing about emotional control that made them seem less like people and more like very attractive ice sculptures. Showing emotion was considered weakness. Raising your voice was scandalous. Smiling in public would probably cause a constitutional crisis. And the most emotionally controlled of them all was Princess Seraphine, third in line to the throne, commander of the Northern Territories, and widely known as the Cold Princess. Not just because of her species' literal coldness, but because in a culture that prized emotional discipline, she was considered the absolute pinnacle. I'd seen her twice from a distance during my time here, once during a formal ceremony where she'd stood motionless for 3 hours without even blinking, and once passing through a corridor where even hardened palace guards had straightened their postures and looked nervous. She was tall even for a glaciary, with ice-blue hair that fell past her shoulders and golden eyes that seemed to look through you rather than at you. She moved with the kind of precise grace that suggested she'd never made an uncontrolled movement in her entire life. And today, lucky me, I got to work on her personal armor while she was wearing it. Vera, on a scale of 1 to 10, how likely is this assignment to end with my death? Insufficient data to calculate accurately. However, I note that the last 3 technicians assigned to work on royal equipment requested immediate transfers afterward, citing severe psychological stress. They didn't die, though. That's something. One developed a persistent tremor in his hands that ended his career. Another required extensive therapy for anxiety disorders. The third converted to a religious order and now lives in a monastery on a planet with no winter seasons. Okay, that's actually worse than dying. Thanks for that context, VERA. I reached the Royal Armory, a cavernous chamber lined with crystalline storage units that hummed with contained energy. The temperature here was even lower than the rest of the palace. The glacieri preferred cold, to the point that what humans considered comfortable they found suffocatingly warm. Princess Seraphine stood on a raised platform in the center of the room, wearing her ceremonial armor, surrounded by 3 attendants who looked like they were actively trying to become invisible. The armor was incredible from an engineering perspective, living crystal that bonded with glacieri physiology, creating a flexible but nearly impenetrable protective layer. It was also apparently malfunctioning, which was why I'd been summoned. Something about instability in the shoulder joint mechanisms that needed to be assessed before tomorrow's diplomatic ceremony. I approached the platform with my toolkit, very carefully not looking directly at the princess, because that seemed like the kind of thing that might be considered disrespectful, and I was trying very hard not to give anyone reasons to execute me. One of the attendants, a nervous-looking glacieri with white hair and silver eyes, gestured me toward a ladder that led up to the platform. "The shoulder assembly," she whispered, like speaking at normal volume might trigger catastrophe. "Careful, do not touch Her Highness." "Wasn't planning on it," I muttered, climbing the ladder with my toolkit. From up close, the armor was even more impressive, layers of crystal that shifted and flowed like liquid, responding to the princess's movements with perfect synchronization. I could see the problem immediately. There was a microfracture in the shoulder joint's primary crystal that was causing harmonic instability in the whole assembly. Princess Seraphine stood absolutely motionless, staring straight ahead, not acknowledging my presence at all. I might as well have been a piece of furniture for all the reaction she showed. Her face was perfectly composed, beautiful and cold, and utterly expressionless. I'd seen warmer emotions from the automated maintenance robots. "Right," I said to no one in particular, pulling out my crystalline resonance scanner. "Just need to get a detailed reading of the fracture pattern. Won't take long. Probably won't cause any catastrophic failures. Probably." I leaned in closer, reaching past the princess's shoulder to get my scanner positioned correctly. The crystal was vibrating at a frequency that suggested the fracture was propagating slowly but steadily. I'd need to get a measurement from multiple angles to determine the repair approach. "VERA, what's the resonance reading?" 4.7 kilohertz with harmonic distortion in the upper registers. The fracture is definitely propagating. I recommend immediate intervention before it reaches the primary load-bearing structures. I shifted my position on the ladder, reaching for a different tool from my belt. The ladder rung under my left foot felt slippery. Frost had accumulated on the metal despite the environmental controls. I should have noticed it, should have been more careful, should have taken an extra second to secure my footing. Instead, my boot slipped. I fell forward, my hand reaching out instinctively to catch myself, and made contact with something that definitely wasn't the armor. Something soft and yielding and absolutely, definitely, catastrophically the princess's body in exactly the location that would be maximally inappropriate in literally any culture in the known galaxy. Time stopped. The entire room went so silent I could hear the crystalline resonance of the armor humming. Every attendant froze. The guards stationed at the doors reached for their weapons, long blades made of sharpened ice that could apparently cut through bone like it was paper. I scrambled backward so fast I nearly fell off the ladder entirely, my brain simultaneously trying to process what had just happened, and also trying to figure out if there was any way to travel backward in time and prevent it from happening. "I am so sorry," I started, the words tumbling out in a rush. "That was completely accidental. I slipped on the ladder. I wasn't trying to, I would never deliberately. I deeply apologize for the..." Princess Seraphine turned to face me, and that's when I noticed something impossible. Her cheeks were glowing, not metaphorically. Actually, literally glowing with a warm bioluminescence that shifted between gold and rose, pulsing gently beneath her crystalline skin. I'd never seen anything like it on a glacieri. Everything I'd read about them said they didn't have any bioluminescent capabilities at all. But there it was, undeniable, spreading from her face down her neck like a sunrise breaking over ice. Her golden eyes, previously cold and distant, were wide with what looked like shock. Her perfect composure cracked. Her breathing, previously controlled to the point of invisibility, became rapid and visible. Her hands, which had been perfectly still at her sides, started trembling. The attendants began whispering frantically in the glaciary language, words my translator was struggling to process. Something about resonance, awakening, old biology, impossible. One of them looked like she might faint. The guards hadn't lowered their weapons, but they were looking at each other in confusion rather than at me with murderous intent. Princess Seraphine took a step toward me, then another. Her movements had lost their mechanical precision, becoming almost uncertain. The warm glow was intensifying, spreading across more of her visible skin, and I could see her fighting for control of her expression and failing. Something that might have been wonder crossed her face, or confusion, or both. When she spoke, her voice trembled with an emotion that no glaciary was supposed to show, let alone royalty. "Prepare yourself," she said, and the glow pulsed brighter with each word. "And come to my quarters, human." The entire court seemed to hold its breath. I was fairly certain I'd stopped breathing entirely. This was either a death sentence delivered in the most elaborate way possible, or something else was happening that I absolutely did not understand. The princess turned and walked away with deliberate steps that were nothing like her usual fluid grace, like she was concentrating very hard on putting one foot in front of the other. The attendants scrambled after her, still whispering frantically. The guards finally lowered their weapons, but kept their eyes on me with expressions that suggested they were waiting for orders about what to do with the human, who just committed what had to be the most spectacular breach of protocol in recent royal history. I stood on the ladder, my heart hammering, my hands still tingling from the contact, and tried to process what had just happened. "Vera," I said quietly, "what exactly did I just do?" "Unknown. However, I am detecting highly unusual readings from the princess's biosignature. Her surface temperature increased by 7 degrees during the interaction, and I'm registering electromagnetic activity consistent with involuntary emotional response. This is not documented in any glaciary biological literature I can access. Is she going to execute me? I genuinely cannot predict the outcome of this situation, Daniel. But I note that prepare yourself and come to my quarters could be interpreted in multiple ways, not all of which involve your immediate death. That's really not as comforting as you think it is." One of the guards approached the platform, his ice blade sheathed but his expression unreadable. "You will come with us, human. The princess has commanded your presence. Do not attempt to leave the palace or communicate with anyone outside." "Right," I said, climbing down from the ladder on shaking legs. "To her quarters, where I should prepare myself for something." "For your fate," the guard replied, which was absolutely the kind of dramatic phrasing that did nothing to calm my nerves. As I was escorted through the palace corridors toward whatever awaited me in the princess's private quarters, I couldn't stop replaying that moment of contact. The warmth that had bloomed beneath her skin, the way her eyes had widened, the tremor in her voice when she'd spoken. Something had happened, something that went beyond simple physical contact, something that the attendants recognized but I didn't understand, and I was about to find out exactly what that something was. The waiting chamber where the guards deposited me was surprisingly comfortable for a place where I was potentially waiting to die. Plush seating made from some kind of insulated material, walls decorated with ice sculptures that seemed to shift and flow in the ambient light, and a viewport that looked out over Karith's 9 frozen wastes where storms of crystalline snow painted the landscape in ever-changing patterns. Under different circumstances, I might have found it beautiful. Currently, I was too busy trying to control my panic breathing to appreciate the aesthetics. "Vera," I subvocalized, keeping my voice too quiet for any potential listeners. "Access everything you can find about glaciary biology, specifically anything related to skin temperature changes or bioluminescent reactions. Accessing restricted databases. Please note that I am technically violating several information security protocols, but given that you may be facing execution, I calculate that the risk is acceptable. There was a pause while data streamed across my neural interface. Daniel, I have found something extremely interesting in the historical archives. There are references to a biological mechanism called the resonance in documents dating back approximately 400 years. What kind of mechanism? A spontaneous emotional and physiological awakening triggered by physical contact with a genetically compatible partner. According to these records, the glacieri once used the resonance as the biological foundation for their bonding practices. When two glacieri with compatible genetic markers touched, they would experience a cascade of neurological and biochemical changes resulting in immediate emotional attachment, increased body temperature, bioluminescence, and what the documents describe as the awakening of the dormant heart. That sounds intense, also possibly problematic from a consent perspective. The records indicate it was considered a sacred and positive experience. However, approximately 300 years ago, the glacieri royal lines began implementing genetic modification programs designed to breed out the resonance. They considered it a weakness, an evolutionary liability that interfered with the emotional control they were cultivating as a cultural ideal. By 200 years ago, instances of the resonance had become extremely rare. By 100 years ago, they were effectively non-existent in the royal bloodlines. I processed that information while staring out at the frozen landscape. So what you're telling me is that Princess Seraphine, member of the royal family that supposedly bred this reaction out of their genetics centuries ago, just experienced the resonance when I accidentally touched her. That is the most logical interpretation of the observed phenomena, yes. And this resonance thing, it's like, what? Immediate pair bonding, love at first touch. The historical accounts describe it as more complex than simple romantic attachment. It's a biological recognition of genetic compatibility, combined with an involuntary emotional awakening. The affected individual experiences emotions with full intensity for the first time, having previously existed in the emotionally suppressed state typical of modern glacieri culture. The experience is described as overwhelming, disorienting, and ultimately transformative. So she's not planning to execute me. She's, what? Emotionally attached to me because of a random genetic lottery. Possibly. Though I note that the resonance requires physical contact to trigger, and glacieri culture has strict prohibitions against touching precisely to prevent accidental bonding. You may have been the first person to make skin contact with the princess in her entire adult life. I sat down heavily on one of the couches, my mind racing. This was worse than execution in some ways. At least with execution, I'd just be dead and it would be over. But if Princess Seraphine had just experienced some kind of biological bonding reaction, because I'd slipped on a ladder and grabbed her ass, then we were in complicated territory that made potential death seem straightforward by comparison. 3 hours passed. The guards outside my door changed shifts twice. No one came to explain anything or update me on my situation. I alternated between panic, confusion, and a weird kind of sympathetic concern for the princess who was apparently experiencing emotions for the first time because of my clumsiness. Finally, the door opened. A different attendant entered, older than the ones from the armory, with a presence that suggested significant authority. She looked at me with an expression that I couldn't quite read, but that definitely included some judgment. The princess will see you now, human. You will follow me. You will not speak unless she addresses you directly. You will not make any sudden movements. And you will absolutely not touch Her Highness again unless she specifically requests it. Is this clear? Extremely clear, crystal clear. Clarity is my middle name. Actually, it's not, but you get the idea. She gave me a look that suggested humor was not appreciated, then turned and led me deeper into the royal wing. The corridors here were more ornate than the sections of the palace I'd been working in, with walls that seemed to be carved from single pieces of ice, but were somehow structural and permanent. We passed guards who watched me with expressions ranging from curiosity to hostility, and I tried very hard to look like someone who hadn't accidentally triggered a biological awakening in their princess, through the most embarrassing physical contact possible. The attendant stopped before a set of doors carved with intricate crystalline patterns. Her Highness's private quarters. Remember, do not touch, do not speak unless addressed, and try not to cause any additional catastrophes. I'm just going to stand very still and hope for the best, I replied. She opened the doors and gestured me inside, then closed them behind me, leaving me alone in Princess Seraphine's personal chambers. The space was surprising. I'd expected something imposing and formal, a throne room in miniature designed to intimidate. Instead, I was looking at quarters that were almost cozy, still grand by my standards, but clearly designed for living rather than for impressing visitors. There were shelves lined with data crystals, what looked like personal items collected over years, windows that faced toward Karith 9 northern auroras. The temperature was cold even by palace standards, but there was a lived-in quality to the space that made it feel less like a royal chamber and more like someone's actual home. Princess Seraphine stood by the window with her back to me, no longer wearing the ceremonial armor. She changed into simpler robes that somehow made her look more vulnerable rather than less formal. And the glow was still there. I could see it even from behind, a warm luminescence beneath her crystalline skin that pulsed gently like a heartbeat. Princess Seraphine, I said, because the silence was becoming unbearable. I want to apologize again for— Do not apologize, she interrupted, her voice still carrying that tremor I'd heard in the armory. What happened was not your fault. The frost on the ladder was maintenance negligence. Your contact was accidental. This is understood. She turned to face me, and I got my first clear look at her since the incident. The warm glow was concentrated around her face and neck, shifting in intensity with what I could only assume were emotional fluctuations. Her golden eyes, which I'd only seen cold and distant before, were bright with something that looked like confusion mixed with wonder. Her hands were clasped in front of her, and I could see them trembling despite her obvious efforts at control. What is not understood, she continued, is what has occurred as a result of that contact. I have been alive for 28 standard years. In that time, I have never experienced what I am experiencing now. My advisors are in emergency session attempting to determine the appropriate response to a situation that was supposed to be impossible. The resonance, I said quietly. VERA found references to it in historical archives. Yes, the resonance. She said the words like they were foreign to her, which I suppose they essentially were. I was taught it was extinct, bred out of our lineage through 3 centuries of careful genetic management. I was taught that emotional attachment was a weakness our ancestors had overcome. I was taught to be cold, controlled, perfect in my discipline. She paused, and the glow intensified. I was not taught what to do when I suddenly feel. Everything? What do you feel? I asked, then immediately worried that was too personal a question. But she answered anyway, her words coming faster now, less controlled. Warmth, confusion. A pulling sensation toward you that is both chemical and something else. Curiosity about what you are thinking. Concern about what you must think of me. Fear that this is wrong. Hope that it might not be. And underneath all of it, something my education has no words for because we do not acknowledge its existence. What's that? Want. She said it like a confession. I want to understand what has happened. I want to ask you questions about things I have never wondered about before. I want to touch you again to see if the reaction intensifies or diminishes. I want things human, and that is not supposed to be possible for someone like me. I didn't know what to say to that. She was looking at me with an intensity that suggested she was genuinely seeking answers, treating me like I might be an expert on emotions when I'd spent most of my adult life avoiding complicated feelings through a combination of workaholism and commitment issues. My name is Daniel, I offered. If we're going to talk about complicated emotional reactions, you should probably use my actual name instead of human. Daniel. She tested the name, and I watched the glow pulse when she said it. That is a human name tradition. We do not use names in such casual context, but nothing about this situation follows tradition. She took a step closer, and I had to resist the urge to step back. Daniel, tell me about emotions. You experience them constantly, yes. What is it like to live with such intensity? That's a pretty broad question. There are a lot of different emotions and they all feel different, and honestly, humans aren't always great at dealing with them either. Begin with what I am feeling now. This warmth, this pulling toward you. What is this called? That could be a few different things. Attraction, maybe, or connection. The resonance thing seems like it's combining biological compatibility recognition with emotional awakening, so you're probably experiencing a pretty complicated mix of feelings all at once. Attraction, she repeated, taking another step closer. We were now about 3 feet apart, close enough that I could see the patterns in her crystalline skin, the way the warm glow moved beneath it like light through water. This is acceptable, in human culture, to feel attraction to someone you have just met. I mean, yeah, it happens all the time, though usually the circumstances are less dramatic. And what does one do with this attraction? How does one process it? I laughed nervously. Honestly, humans mostly make terrible decisions about it. We either act on it impulsively, or we overthink it until we talk ourselves out of it, or we write really bad poetry. There's not really a guidebook. I see. She was quiet for a moment, studying my face with an intensity that made me acutely aware of every micro-expression I was making. Daniel, I need you to understand something. Among my people, the resonance, when it occurred, was considered sacred, a gift from biology itself. The old texts speak of it as two souls recognizing each other across the boundary of flesh. My advisors are divided on whether this is a blessing or a curse, whether I should honor it or fight it. But they all agree on one thing. If the resonance is real, if it has truly occurred, then you and I are bound by something deeper than law or culture. That's a lot of pressure for a random technician who slipped on a ladder. Do you feel it? She asked suddenly. This pulling, this warmth, or is this entirely one-sided, a biological reaction that affects only me? I considered lying. Considered saying I felt nothing. But the truth was, standing there looking at her, at this woman who was experiencing overwhelming emotions for the first time, who was glowing with warmth that had broken through centuries. I have considered that possibility, she said quietly, that any compatible touch would have triggered this, that you are merely circumstance rather than destiny. But does it matter? If I am experiencing these feelings, if they are real to me, does the mechanism of their origin change their validity? I don't know, maybe. Consent gets really complicated when biology is making decisions for you. Consent. She tested the word. You are concerned about my ability to choose freely when I am under the influence of a biological reaction I have never experienced before. Basically, yeah. She smiled, actually smiled. It was small and uncertain and absolutely stunning on a face I'd only seen frozen in perfect control. You are kind, Daniel, and careful. These are good qualities. She held out her hand, palm up, an invitation rather than a command. Touch me again. Let us see if the reaction intensifies or if it was merely the shock of first contact. Are you sure that's a good idea? I am certain it is a terrible idea by any rational measure. But I find I do not care about rational measures currently. Please. I looked at her extended hand, glowing faintly with that warm bioluminescence. Everything in my brain that dealt with self-preservation and risk assessment was screaming warnings. Everything else was curious about what would happen. I reached out and placed my hand in hers. The warmth that bloomed from the contact was immediate and intense. The glow beneath her skin brightened dramatically, spreading from the point of contact up her arm and across her chest. Princess Seraphine gasped, actually gasped, a sound of pure surprised pleasure, and I felt her fingers close around mine with a grip that was gentle but unmistakably possessive. Oh, she breathed, and her eyes were wide with wonder. Oh, I did not know, I could not have known. What? I asked, my own hand tingling from the contact. What do you feel? Everything, she whispered. Every nerve ending suddenly awake, every emotion amplified. And underneath it all, this absolute certainty that you are meant to be here, that this is correct, that I have been waiting for this my entire life without knowing what I was waiting for. We stood there, hands joined, while the implications of that statement settled over both of us like frost in the cold air of Karith 9. This was definitely more complicated than execution would have been. The next 3 days existed in a strange bubble of surreality where I was simultaneously a prisoner, a guest, an object of political controversy, and the focus of an ice princess's newly awakened emotional spectrum. I'd been moved to quarters in the royal wing, ostensibly for my protection, realistically because they wanted to keep me contained and available. The rooms were nicer than anywhere I'd ever lived in my entire life, but the guards outside my door made it clear I wasn't free to leave. Seraphine visited me 5 times the first day alone. The first visit was technically an official inquiry. She arrived with 2 advisors and a guard, maintained a formal distance, and asked detailed questions about my background and intentions that were clearly for the benefit of her political handlers. Her face remained mostly controlled, but I could see the warm glow flickering beneath her skin whenever she looked directly at me, and her hands kept making small aborted movements like she was fighting the urge to reach for me. The second visit, 2 hours later, had only one advisor and was ostensibly about determining my living arrangements. It lasted 45 minutes and somehow evolved into a conversation about human family structures and whether siblings typically felt protective of each other, which seemed to fascinate her. The third visit had no attendance at all, which caused the guards visible concern, and consisted entirely of her asking me to explain what anger felt like and why humans seemed to express it so frequently. I tried to give examples, and she listened with absolute focus, asking follow-up questions that suggested she was building a mental catalog of emotions she'd never been permitted to acknowledge. The fourth visit was supposedly to bring me dinner, but actually seemed designed to sit near me while she processed her day. She told me about a council meeting where she'd nearly failed to maintain composure when a noble had insulted her judgment, and how foreign it was to feel the hot flash of anger rise in her chest. She described it with the wonder of someone discovering a new sense. The fifth visit was late evening, and she entered my quarters looking exhausted and overwhelmed. She sat on the couch across from me and just said, "I am tired of being watched," with such raw honesty that my heart twisted. "I know the feeling," I replied. "Guards outside my door make me feel like a criminal or a particularly valuable piece of equipment." "You are neither, you are." She paused, searching for words. "You are the person who woke me up." "That is what it feels like, Daniel. Like I was sleeping through my own life and you startled me awake. Everything is brighter now, sharper, more real, and I cannot decide if I should thank you or blame you because it is beautiful and terrifying in equal measure." By the second day, her visits had become routine enough that the guards stopped looking surprised when she arrived. She came early in the morning to describe a dream she'd had. Apparently the glacieri did dream, but were trained to dismiss the content as meaningless, and she was discovering that dreams reflected emotions she didn't know she had. She came at midday to ask about human courtship rituals after reading historical texts that made absolutely no sense to her suppressed emotional context. She came in the evening to teach me basic glacieri language, because she said it frustrated her to rely entirely on translators. During that evening session, sitting close together while she corrected my pronunciation of words I couldn't quite wrap my human vocal cords around, she reached out and took my hand without asking permission. The glow bloomed immediately, and she smiled that small, uncertain smile that was becoming increasingly familiar. "Does this disturb you?" she asked. "My constant need to maintain contact. Honestly, I don't know how I feel about it. Part of me is concerned that you're not in full control of these impulses. Part of me understands that you're experiencing something overwhelming and I'm the only person who seems to help ground you. And part of me." I trailed off, not sure I should finish that thought. "Part of you," she prompted. "Part of me likes it," I admitted, "which makes me worry that I'm taking advantage of your situation." "You cannot take advantage of someone who is pursuing you relentlessly," she pointed out with logic that was characteristically glacieri even while discussing completely unprecedented emotions. "I am aware that I am intense, that I seek you out constantly, that I engineer excuses to be near you. But I do this by choice, Daniel. The resonance has awakened my emotions, but my actions are my own. Are you sure? Can you be sure when you're drunk on feelings you've never processed before? She considered that seriously. Perhaps not entirely sure. Perhaps I am learning what it means to choose in real time, making mistakes as I go. But the alternative is to deny everything I feel, because it might be complicated or inconvenient. And that seems like returning to sleep after having finally woken up. The political situation continued to escalate in ways that VERA kept me updated on through news feeds I probably wasn't supposed to have access to. There were three major factions forming in the Glaciary court. Traditionalists who wanted me removed immediately before I corrupted the princess further. Progressives who saw the resonance as a sacred sign that should be honored. And pragmatists who were trying to figure out how to use the situation to their political advantage. The most vocal opponent was Lord Keithrin, a high noble who'd apparently been planning to propose a political marriage between his daughter and Seraphine's older brother. He'd given several speeches in the council about the dangers of allowing primitive biological reactions to override centuries of careful genetic and cultural refinement. His daughter, Lady Urin, had visited Seraphine once during my second day there. I'd heard raised voices through the walls, which was apparently shocking given that Glaciary royalty never raised their voices. The progressives were led by an older advisor named Councillor Thale, who VERA informed me was something of a historical scholar. He'd apparently spent his entire career researching the old ways before the Great Suppression, and he saw Seraphine's resonance as validation of his life's work. He'd been arguing that the Glaciary had lost something essential when they bred out their emotional capacity, and this was an opportunity to reclaim it. On the morning of the third day, Seraphine arrived at my quarters earlier than usual, and I could tell immediately that something was wrong. The warm glow was muted, flickering uncertainly, and her expression was more controlled, more like the cold mask I'd first seen on her face. "There is to be a formal challenge," she said without preamble. "Lord Keithrin has invoked an old protocol. I must demonstrate that I retain full emotional control and can still fulfill my duties as princess. If I fail, I must choose between renouncing my position or severing my connection to you." "Severing how?" "You would be exiled, sent back to human space, forbidden from ever returning to Korath 9. Her voice remained steady, but I watched the glow flicker with each word. "And I would undergo genetic therapy to suppress the resonance permanently, ensuring it could never occur again." "When is this challenge?" "Tomorrow, in the throne hall before the full court." She finally looked directly at me, and I saw fear in her eyes for the first time. "Daniel, I do not know if I can do this. Every day I am less cold, less controlled. How can I prove I am unchanged when I have changed completely?" I stood and crossed to where she was standing, stopping just short of touching her because I knew if we made contact, her glow would intensify and undermine the control she was trying to project. "What happens during this challenge?" "I will be tested, given scenarios designed to provoke emotional reaction. I must demonstrate that I can maintain perfect discipline, that I can still be the cold princess they need me to be." Her hands clenched at her sides. "I must pretend that nothing has changed, that you mean nothing to me, that the resonance is merely a biological curiosity I have fully mastered." "Can you do that?" "I do not know. A week ago I could have done it easily because I felt nothing. Now I feel everything and I must pretend I still feel nothing." She finally met my eyes. "Will you be angry with me if I succeed? If I prove I can suppress what I feel and choose duty over this awakening?" "I'll be sad," I admitted, "but I'll understand. You're a princess with responsibilities to your people. I'm a technician who slipped on a ladder. If you need to choose your duty over whatever this is between us, I can't fault you for that." "That is the correct answer," she said quietly. "The mature, reasonable answer, but I find I dislike it intensely." "Is that anger?" "No." The glow pulsed brighter despite her efforts to control it. "I believe this is heartbreak, an emotion I have been reading about but did not understand until this moment. She left shortly after, and I spent the rest of the day trying not to think about the challenge. VERA tried to distract me with updates about crystal matrix repairs I'd been scheduled to complete before all this happened, but neither of us could focus on normal work when tomorrow might end with Seraphine choosing to suppress everything she'd become and send me away. That evening, she came to my quarters one last time. She arrived alone, which made the guards visibly nervous, and closed the door behind her with the finality of someone making a decision. "I should not be here," she said. "Tomorrow I must prove I can resist my connection to you. Tonight I find I do not want to resist." She crossed the room and took both my hands in hers, the warm glow blooming immediately. "Whatever happens tomorrow, I want to remember this. What it feels like to choose connection over duty, to prioritize feeling over control. Seraphine, let me speak, please." She took a breath. "I have been Princess Seraphine my entire life. Cold, controlled, perfect in discipline. I have never chosen anything for myself because choice implies preference, implies emotion, implies weakness. But you have shown me that feeling is not weakness, that choosing is not failure, that there is strength in admitting you want something even when duty says you should not want it." "What do you want?" I asked quietly. "I want to fail tomorrow's test," she said, and the words came out like a confession. "I want to stand before the court and let them see that I have changed. I want to choose you over centuries of tradition. I want to be brave enough to feel everything even if it costs me everything." Her grip on my hands tightened. "But I am afraid, Daniel, afraid of disappointing my people, afraid of destroying what my family has built, afraid that choosing personal feeling over duty makes me selfish and weak." "It doesn't make you weak, it makes you human." I paused. "Well, not literally human, but you know what I mean." She laughed, and it sounded like breaking ice. "I do know what you mean, and that is part of what frightens me, that I understand human concepts now better than glaciary ideals, that I relate more to your warmth than to my people's cold." She pulled me closer, until we were standing close enough that I could feel the subtle warmth radiating from her skin, so different from the killing cold I'd been warned about. "If I fail tomorrow, I will lose my position but gain my freedom. If I succeed, I will keep my duty but lose myself. Neither choice is without cost." "Then choose the one you can live with," I said. "Not the one that pleases other people, the one that lets you wake up the next day without regret." That is very human advice. "Is that bad?" "No," she smiled, and this time it was full and genuine and absolutely radiant. "I think perhaps I am becoming a little bit human, and I find I do not mind." We stood there in my quarters, hands joined, while the warm glow pulsed between us like a heartbeat, and I realized that regardless of what happened tomorrow, something fundamental had already changed. Princess Seraphine had learned to feel, had learned to want, had learned to choose. And whatever the cost of that awakening, she had decided it was worth paying. The throne hall was designed to intimidate, which I suppose was the point of throne halls across cultures and species. The ceiling soared at least 40 feet high, carved from single piece of ice that somehow remained structural despite its apparent delicacy. Crystalline columns lined the walls, each one embedded with luminescent minerals that created a cold blue light throughout the space. The throne itself sat on a raised platform at the far end, and it was currently occupied by Seraphine's older brother, Crown Prince Atharis, who would become king when their father eventually stepped down. I was standing in the crowd of observers along with approximately 300 glaciary nobles, court officials, and interested parties. The guards had placed me in a section where I was visible from the throne platform but not prominently positioned, probably deliberate messaging about my status as relevant but not important. VERA was providing a running commentary through my neural interface about the various political players in attendance, who supported what faction, and the probable outcome of different test scenarios. "Your stress hormones are elevated," VERA noted clinically. "Heart rate 115 beats per minute. Respiratory rate increased. You are experiencing significant anxiety about the proceedings." "Thank you for that helpful observation, VERA. I hadn't noticed I was terrified." "I am simply noting that your emotional investment in the princess's choice, appears to exceed what might be expected from a casual acquaintance formed over 3 days. Can we not do psychological analysis right now? As you wish. Though I will note for the record that humans frequently develop significant emotional attachments in crisis situations. And VRA, please. The hall fell silent as Princess Seraphine entered through the main doors. She was wearing her full ceremonial armor, now properly repaired, and she moved with that precise, controlled grace I'd first seen. Her face was a mask of perfect composure, cold and beautiful and utterly expressionless. The warm glow I'd become accustomed to seeing on her skin was completely absent, suppressed through what must have been enormous force of will. She looked exactly like the cold princess I'd been warned about, like nothing had changed, like the past 3 days had never happened. Crown Prince Atharis rose from the throne to address the assembly. His voice carried perfectly across the hall. Apparently the acoustics were designed for dramatic royal pronouncements. We gather today to address a matter of great importance to our kingdom. Princess Seraphine has experienced an occurrence of the resonance, a biological phenomenon that has not manifested in our royal line for 3 centuries. Some among us believe this to be a sacred sign that should be honored. Others believe it to be evidence of genetic instability that must be corrected. Today, my sister will demonstrate her capacity to fulfill her duties as princess despite this occurrence. She will be tested according to traditional protocols designed to assess emotional discipline. If she passes these tests, she will retain her full status and authority. If she fails, he paused for effect. Alternative arrangements will be necessary. Lord Kithrin stepped forward from his position among the nobles. He was tall even by glaciary standards, with white hair pulled back severely and silver eyes that held nothing but cold calculation. By tradition, I claim the right to design the tests. Princess Seraphine must demonstrate control under conditions of increasing stress. Seraphine bowed her head in acknowledgement, still maintaining perfect composure. She climbed the steps to stand before the throne, and I noticed her hands were clasped behind her back, probably to hide any trembling. The tests began with verbal challenges. Lord Kithrin presented scenarios designed to provoke anger or pride, situations where she was insulted or questioned or accused of incompetence. Seraphine responded to each with perfect calm, her voice never rising, her expression never changing. She defended her decisions and actions with logical precision, never once showing emotion. Then came physical challenges, exposure to sudden temperature changes, pain stimuli applied through controlled means, even a simulated combat scenario where she had to maintain form while being struck by practice weapons. Through all of it, she remained controlled, moving with mechanical precision, her face never betraying discomfort or reaction. The crowd was impressed. I could hear whispered conversations around me, nobles commenting on her discipline, on how the resonance clearly had not affected her capacity for control. Lord Kithrin was beginning to look frustrated as test after test failed to crack her composure, but I could see what the others couldn't. The subtle tension in her shoulders, the way her hands gripped the practice weapon just slightly too hard, the microscopic pause before each response, as if she was fighting for control before allowing herself to speak. She was maintaining the appearance of perfect discipline, but it was costing her something enormous. The penultimate test was emotional manipulation. They showed her images designed to trigger fear, recordings of battles, scenes of suffering, threats against her family. Then images meant to trigger joy, childhood memories, artistic beauty, moments of past triumph. Through all of it, she remained a statue, acknowledging each image with the same level calm analysis, refusing to show anything resembling feeling. She is going to pass, Vera said quietly. Current probability of success is 93% based on performance metrics. I felt a complicated mix of relief and loss. Relief because she'd keep her position and avoid the genetic therapy that would suppress the resonance permanently. Loss because it meant she'd chosen duty over everything else, had decided that being the cold princess was worth suppressing all the feelings she'd been experiencing. Then Lord Kithrin called for the final test. One last challenge, Your Highness. This one addresses the specific concern that led to these proceedings. We must determine whether your connection to the human has compromised your judgment and emotional control. I felt every eye in the hall turn toward me, and my stomach dropped. Bring the human forward, Lord Keithrin commanded. Guards moved to escort me from the crowd, and I walked toward the throne platform on legs that felt disconnected from my body. I climbed the steps and stood before Seraphine, who was looking at me with that perfectly controlled expression that revealed nothing. But I was close enough now to see her eyes, and in them I saw everything: fear, determination, and something that looked like an apology. The final test is simple, Lord Keithrin announced to the court. The human will be exiled from Kareth 9, immediately, permanently. If Princess Seraphine is truly in control of her emotions, she will accept this without reaction. If the resonance has compromised her emotional discipline, she will display an inappropriate response. The crowd murmured. This was clever and cruel. It gave Seraphine no way to win without losing. If she showed no emotion at my exile, Seraphine opened her mouth, closed it. Her hands, which had been perfectly still through every other test, began to tremble visibly. The crowd noticed. Lord Keithrin smiled triumphantly. She started, and her voice cracked. The mask was breaking. I could see her fighting to maintain it, fighting to be cold and controlled, to pass this final test. And then she looked at me, really looked at me, not as a test or a political problem, but as the person who'd taught her what anger and joy and fear felt like. And something in her expression changed completely. The warm glow blazed across her skin like sunrise breaking over ice. No, she said, and her voice was steady now, filled with emotion instead of fighting it. No, I do not accept this. The court erupted in shocked whispers. Crown Prince Atharis leaned forward on his throne. Lord Keithrin's smile vanished. Seraphine stepped down from the platform, walked directly to me, and took my hand. The glow intensified, spreading from the point of contact across her entire body until she was luminescent, radiant, glowing with warmth that no glacier was supposed to possess. I will not suppress the resonance, she announced to the assembled court, her voice carrying across the hall with newfound strength. I will not deny what I feel. I will not return to being cold and controlled and empty when I have finally learned what it means to be alive. She turned to face her brother and the council members seated near the throne. You designed these tests to prove I could still be the cold princess, and I could have passed them. I was passing them. But the final test showed me what that passage would cost: my humanity, my connection, myself, and I find the price is too high. You are failing the test, Lord Keithrin said coldly. You are proving yourself unfit for your position. Then I am unfit. The glow pulsed brighter. If being fit requires me to pretend that this connection means nothing, to exile someone who has shown me kindness, to suppress emotions that make me feel truly alive for the first time, then I choose to be unfit. Crown Prince Atharis stood, and the hall fell absolutely silent. Sister, do you understand what you are saying? You are choosing personal feeling over duty. You are choosing one individual over the kingdom. I am choosing to be authentic over performing a role. There is a difference. Seraphine's hand tightened on mine. Our people have spent 3 centuries breeding out emotion, teaching ourselves that cold control is strength. But what if we were wrong? What if we lost something essential when we suppressed the resonance? What if true strength is not the ability to feel nothing, but the courage to feel everything and still choose wisely? That is philosophical debate, not governance, Lord Keithrin argued. Then let me be a philosopher rather than a ruler. She turned back to the crowd. I will step aside from succession if that is what is required. I will not rule if ruling means returning to ice. But I will not suppress who I am becoming. And I will not exile Daniel because political convenience demands it. The crowd was divided. I could see it in their faces. Some looked horrified at her abandonment of tradition. Others looked thoughtful, even moved. A few of the younger nobles were whispering to each other with expressions that suggested Seraphine had just said something they'd been thinking, but never dared voice. Counselor Thale, the progressive advisor who'd been studying the old ways, stood from his seat. If I may address the court. At Atheris's nod, he continued, Princess Seraphine is not the first to experience the resonance in recent months. There have been 3 documented cases among the common population, quietly suppressed, never publicly acknowledged. But they are happening. The old biology is not as extinct as we believed. That caused another wave of shocked murmurs. Lord Keithrin looked genuinely shaken. Our ancestors bred out the resonance because they believed emotion was weakness, Thale continued. But perhaps they were responding to their specific historical context, a time of war when cold discipline was survival. We are no longer in that time. Perhaps it is time to reconsider whether our cultural suppression of feeling serves us or limits us. A younger noble stood, her name Vra identified as Lady Sira. I have wondered for years why we deny ourselves joy in the name of discipline, why connection is treated as weakness. The princess has shown courage today that has nothing to do with cold control and everything to do with honest choice. More nobles began speaking up, not all in support, but enough to show that Seraphine had touched something that resonated beyond just herself. The perfect, cold, emotionless glaciary ideal was being questioned in a way it apparently hadn't been for centuries. Crown Prince Atheris raised his hand for silence. This is not a debate to be resolved in an afternoon, but I acknowledge that my sister has raised questions worthy of serious consideration. He looked at Seraphine with an expression I couldn't quite read. You have failed the test. By tradition, you should renounce your title or submit to genetic suppression of the resonance. Seraphine bowed her head, accepting the judgment. However, Atheris continued, tradition also allows for alternative arrangements when circumstances are unprecedented. You will retain a role in governance, not as direct heir, but as an advisor and representative. You will work with Counselor Thale to research the implications of the resonance and what it might mean for our people's future. And you will not be required to suppress what you have become. The relief that washed over Seraphine's face was visible to everyone in the hall. The warm glow pulsed bright enough that even the distant observers could see it. As for the human, Atheris looked at me directly for the first time. Daniel Hayes, you have caused quite the disruption to our kingdom. Intentionally or not, you have challenged 3 centuries of cultural practice. I really just slipped on a ladder, Your Highness, I said, because apparently my survival instinct had abandoned me entirely. Several nobles made sounds that might have been shocked gasps or possibly suppressed laughter. Even Atheris's mouth twitched slightly. Regardless of intention, you are now part of something larger than a simple accident. You will remain on Kareth 9. You will assist my sister in her research and in her adjustment to whatever this new state is, and you will try very hard not to cause any additional unprecedented cultural upheavals. I'll do my best, Your Highness. The formal proceedings concluded with more speeches and political maneuvering, but I stopped paying close attention because Seraphine was still holding my hand, still glowing, and she was smiling with such genuine happiness that everything else seemed secondary. Later, after the court had dispersed, and we'd navigated about 50 complicated conversations with various nobles and officials, we found ourselves alone in one of the palace's observation rooms. The wall-sized window looked out over Kareth 9 northern wastes, where Aurora danced across the sky in bands of green and blue. I thought you were going to pass the tests, I admitted. You were doing so well maintaining control. I was maintaining the appearance of control, she corrected. Inside, I was screaming. Every test was torture, Daniel, pretending to feel nothing while feeling everything. She leaned against the window, her glow reflecting in the ice. When they announced your exile, I realized I had a choice. I could continue pretending, pass the test, keep my position, and spend the rest of my life wondering what I had sacrificed for duty. Or I could be honest, choose feeling. Accept the consequences. You gave up being in line for the throne. I gained being alive. She turned to look at me. Do you understand? For 28 years I was performing the role of princess. Perfect, cold, controlled. I was good at the performance, but it was not living. It was existing. You woke me up, Daniel, showed me that there was more to existence than perfect discipline. I just touched your butt by accident. She laughed, really laughed, the sound echoing in the observation room. Yes, the most undignified awakening possible, and yet here we are. Here we are, I agreed. So what happens now? Now I learn to balance feeling with responsibility. I work with Counselor Thale to understand what the resonance means for our people's future. I face political opposition from those who think I have abandoned our ideals. She reached for my hand again, and I explore whatever this is between us, not because biology demands it, but because I choose to. Is it still the resonance, or is it something else now? I do not know, perhaps both. Perhaps the resonance awakened the capacity for connection, but what develops from that awakening is genuine choice. She squeezed my hand gently. I know that I enjoy your company, that I feel more myself when you are near, that I want to know you better, not because of biological imperative, but because you are interesting and kind and you make me laugh. Is that not enough? Yeah, I said, feeling warmth that had nothing to do with bioluminescence. That's enough. We stood together watching the aurora dance across Karith's frozen sky, a human technician and an ice princess who had chosen to feel. And I thought about how strange it was that a slip on a ladder had led to this, to cultural upheaval and political drama, and the beginning of something that might be destiny, or might be biology, or might just be two people learning to connect across the boundaries of species and expectation. VERA, I subvocalized. Update my contract status. I think I'm going to be here a while. Noted. Shall I also update your personal status to inadvertently started a cultural revolution? Let's just say relationship. Complicated and leave it at that. 6 months later, Counselor Thale published his comprehensive study on the resonance and its implications. 4 more cases had been documented among the glaciary population. The cultural debate about emotion versus discipline continued, but it was no longer taboo to discuss. Younger glacieri were beginning to experiment with emotional expression in ways that would have been scandalous a year earlier. Seraphine and I were formally bonded in a ceremony that combined human and glacieri traditions, witnessed by a court that had slowly, cautiously begun to accept that change was not always weakness. She still glowed when I touched her. That part of the resonance never faded. But now it was just one aspect of a relationship that had grown well beyond biological triggers into genuine partnership. She had learned to balance her emotions rather than suppress them, finding a middle path between cold control and overwhelming feeling. I had learned about glaciary culture and politics in more detail than I ever wanted to know, and discovered that being the catalyst for cultural change was simultaneously rewarding and exhausting. On the anniversary of what we'd started calling the incident, we stood in the same observation room where we talked after her failed test, watching another aurora paint the sky. Do you ever regret it? I asked. Giving up your position in succession, becoming the princess who chose feeling over duty. She considered the question seriously. She always did, one of the things I'd come to appreciate about her. I regret the pain it caused my family. I regret the political complications, but no, I do not regret the choice itself. She turned to face me, her golden eyes warm. I used to think the ice made us strong. That cold discipline was the foundation of our civilization's greatness. Now I know better. What do you know? That warmth is what makes us alive. That connection is what gives life meaning. That choosing to feel, even when feeling is difficult, is what makes us truly strong. She smiled, and after 6 months it was no longer uncertain or small, but full and genuine. The ice is beautiful, Daniel, but it is the warmth that lets us actually live. I pulled her close, and the glow bloomed between us like it always did. And I thought about how strange and wonderful it was that sometimes the most important moments in life start with the most ridiculous accidents. A slip on a ladder, an unintentional touch, a biological awakening that neither of us had planned. And somehow, against all odds and cultural expectations and 3 centuries of genetic engineering, it had led to this. To partnership and growth and the beginning of something that might eventually change an entire culture's understanding of what it meant to be alive. VERA, I subvocalized one last time. Final status update. How would you characterize our current situation? Improbable but functional. Statistically unlikely but empirically successful. Also, you are both glowing again. Yeah, I replied, looking at Seraphine's luminescent smile.